Okay, so today we're going deep on a story that I think really gripped the nation back in the 90s, and honestly, it continues to kind of generate a lot of buzz to this day. The controversial relationship between Mary Kay Letourneau and Vili Fualaau. We've gotten such a fascinating mix of sources on this one. Biographical snippets, some old news reports, and even an article about a recent movie inspired by this whole case.
It's one of those stories that really just captures the imagination, doesn't it? Forbidden love, a scandal that rocks a community, and a relationship that just totally challenged all these societal
We
norms.
got it. And it feels like everybody has some sort of opinion on this one. So let's set the stage here. We're going back to the early 1990s, Seattle. And Mary Kay Letourneau was this seemingly regular, everyday elementary school teacher, married with 4 kids.
Yeah, on the surface, a pretty normal life, right?
Ugh.
But as with so many stories like this, there's some undercurrents that we really need to understand. The sources actually mention some personal difficulties Letourneau was dealing with. A miscarriage, her father was battling terminal cancer, and there was even a strained marriage.
Right. And it's always important to remember that context never excuses harmful actions, but it can help us understand, maybe some of the complexities of human behavior. So it was during this time that she met Vili Fualaau. He was a second grader in her class and known for his artistic talent. And Letourneau, she took a special interest in really trying to nurture his abilities.
And this is really where the story takes that controversial turn. Fast forward a few years, and Letourneau is now teaching sixth grade, and Fulau is again her student. And their relationship, it crossed the line, becoming sexual when he was 12, and she was 34.
And this is the point where we need to pause. We need to address the elephant in the room here. Regardless of any claimed feelings, any justifications, Letourneau was the adult. She was the authority figure. This was a clear case of child abuse and statutory rape.
Exactly. It's absolutely critical to recognize the power imbalance in this whole situation. Letourneau held a position of trust, a position of responsibility, and she blatantly violated that.
Yeah, the news reports detail how Letourneau's then-husband, Steve, he made this really shocking discovery back in 1997, love letters that she had written to Fualaau. And to add to that, Letourneau was actually 6 months pregnant with Fualaau's child when she was arrested.
Oh, wow. Just imagine the media frenzy around all this. This wasn't some small local story. This captivated the nation. Here was this seemingly average teacher, a mother herself, engaging in this relationship with a child. It really challenged our understanding of what was acceptable, where those lines should be drawn.
Absolutely. And the court proceedings, they were equally compelling. Letourneau, she pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree child rape. And even during the sentencing, there were a lot of mixed emotions. Fualaau's own mother actually spoke up for Letourneau, stating that she felt like Letourneau had already suffered enough punishment.
It speaks to the complexities of this whole case, these blurred lines and the emotional turmoil that everyone involved must have been going through. It wasn't some clear-cut black and white situation by any means.
No, not at all. Letourneau was sentenced to 7.5 years, but with a good chunk of it suspended, on the condition that she had absolutely no contact with Fualaau. It seemed like a chance for her to rebuild her life, to address the harm that she had caused.
It did. But the story doesn't end there. Letourneau was paroled after serving just 6 months. But shortly after, she was found in a car with Fualaau, directly violating that court order.
It's just mind-boggling, isn't it? You'd think that the prospect of going to jail would have made her rethink things,
Yeah.
prioritize her freedom, the well-being of her other children. But that determination to be with Fualaau seemed to just overshadow everything else.
Yeah, it really raises some questions about Letourneau's mindset. Like, how deep was this attachment to Fualaau? Did she truly grasp the weight of her actions and, the consequences that were attached to them?
It's really hard to say. So back to prison. She went this time to serve the rest of her sentence. And while she was incarcerated, she gave birth to their second daughter, Georgia.
This is where the narrative sort of takes on a different tone, I think. We're not just talking about a legal case anymore. We're now starting to look at the complexities of this relationship that defied all those societal norms. And it really challenged our understanding of love manipulation and the lasting effects of trauma in those early years.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And this is really just the beginning of their story. There's still so much more to uncover, including their eventual marriage, the public scrutiny they faced, and those long-lasting consequences of the choices that they made.
I agree. It's a story that makes you think. It challenges your preconceived notions about everything, and ultimately it forces you to confront all those gray areas of human behavior.
It does. There's just so much to unpack here.
There is.
Okay, so we left off with Letourneau serving out the remainder of that sentence. Now fast forward to 2004. Letourneau was released from prison. And in a move that really surprised a lot of people, Fualaau, who is now a legal adult, successfully petitions the court to have that no-contact order lifted.
That was a bold move for sure. And it really reignited that public debate. Was Fualaau truly free to make his own choices at this point? Or was he still under the influence of that power dynamic, from when he was a child? It's a question that I think continues to be debated even today.
For sure. And defying all expectations, they got married in 2005. The media just went absolutely wild. Wedding details were all over the news. It was this spectacle that many felt shouldn't have even happened.
Yeah, it really speaks to the fascination with this whole case. Maybe even a little bit of morbid curiosity. People just couldn't help but follow along, even if they were conflicted about the entire situation.
Right. And we can't forget that Letourneau, she remained a registered sex offender, barring her from teaching in public schools. She was allowed to teach in private settings and community colleges, but her professional life was just forever altered by this.
Absolutely. The legal ramifications of her actions, they continued to follow her, even as she tried to build a life with Fualaau. And that's something we see time and time again in these kinds of cases. The consequences are long-lasting, and they affect both personal and professional spheres.
Yeah, and they went on to have 2 daughters together, so Letourneau became a mother of 6, navigating family life with this constant cloud of judgment and scrutiny hanging over them.
Really makes you think about all the different perspectives here. Some people viewed Letourneau as this predator who manipulated a young boy, while others saw Fualaau as this adult who was capable of making his own choices. The ethical and legal lines were so blurred, it made it incredibly difficult to really reconcile all the different viewpoints.
It did. Now, they did grant a few interviews, offering some glimpses into their unconventional life. One that stands out is their interview with Barbara Walters on their 10th wedding anniversary.
Oh yeah, I remember that one. It was a fascinating look into their relationship dynamic. They really presented themselves as this loving couple committed to each other and to their children, despite those really unusual circumstances of how it all began.
Right. It seems like they were really trying to control the narrative, to show the world that their love was genuine and that they were making their family work despite all the odds.
I think so. But, the skepticism it remained, a lot of people just couldn't get past the origins of their relationship. That power imbalance was just so obvious.
Right. And then, cracks started to show in their seemingly united front. In 2017, Fualaau actually filed for separation, although they reportedly continued to live together until 2019.
Yeah, that separation was a big turning point. It felt like it confirmed what a lot of people had suspected all along, that the foundation of their relationship was just inherently flawed. The age difference, that power dynamic, and all that societal pressure, it may have finally just taken its toll.
Yeah. And then tragedy struck. Letourneau was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer, and she passed away in July 2020 at the age of 58. It was a sad end to a story that had really captivated the nation for decades.
It was. Even in death, though, the story remained complex. Despite that separation, Fualaau was reportedly by her side during her illness, and both families released a joint statement expressing their love and support.
It's true. It really demonstrated the complicated nature of their bond, that lingering affection and connection that endured despite all the challenges and the controversy.
Yeah, and it highlighted the impact on their children, both from Letourneau's previous marriage and the 2 daughters that she shared with Fualaau. They had lost their mother, a figure who, despite all her transgressions, was a significant part of their lives.
Right. And what about Fualaau? How did he cope with Letourneau's death and this reemergence of their story into the public eye?
Well, he's remained relatively private, but he has spoken out about the exploitation and misrepresentation of their story, particularly regarding that 2023 film, May December, which was inspired by their case.
Right. He felt that the film really sensationalized their lives, focusing on the scandalous aspects without truly understanding the nuances and the complexities of their relationship.
Exactly. It raises those important questions about how we tell stories like this. How do we balance that entertainment value with respecting the real-life individuals involved and their actual experiences?
And it really underscores the fact that Fualaau, while often seen as the victim, is also an individual with agency, with his own perspective and his own story to tell.
Absolutely. He's pushed back against that narrative that's been built around him, seeking to reclaim his voice and challenge that simplistic portrayal of their relationship.
I think that's so important. His perspective is crucial, and it reminds us that there's always more to the story than what we see on the surface.
And that's the beauty of these deep dives. We get to explore the layers, the complexities, and those different perspectives that make up a story like this.
It's almost hard to imagine how differently this whole story might have played out if it happened today. with social media and the internet, and everybody's got an opinion.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. The constant opinions, the hashtags, the memes, even viral videos. It's a completely different world now compared to, back then when this all first started.
For sure. Back then, the news cycle was slower, more
Mhm.
controlled even. But now, like you said, everybody with a smartphone is a commentator. The narrative can shift with like a single tweet or a TikTok video.
It really is both fascinating and a little scary to think about,
Hmm.
how that kind of instant feedback loop could have impacted everything. The events, the legal proceedings, how the public viewed both Letourneau and Fualaau.
Yeah, do you think the court of public opinion would have been more sympathetic toward Letourneau? Or would they have been even more condemning?
It's tough to say, really. The internet can be a real force for good, for empathy and understanding, but it can also make things so much worse, amplifying negativity and judgment. It's hard to know which side would have been stronger here.
And it's not just about how many opinions there are. It's about how fast information spreads and how far it reaches. Back then, it took time for news to travel, for people to form those opinions. But now it's instant. And the pressure to react, to pick a side, it can be overwhelming.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we've seen how social media can really shape perceptions. Sometimes it's for the better, sometimes not so much. It's a powerful tool, and I think it needs to be used carefully, especially when dealing with sensitive topics like this one.
Right. And with this case, I mean, the complexities are just endless. We talked about the legal stuff, the
Yeah.
societal norms that were challenged, the emotional turmoil. But, one thing that keeps coming up is the question of motive.
Yeah.
What made Letourneau do what she did?
Well, that's $1 million question, isn't it? Psychologists, legal experts, people just sitting at home trying to figure it all out. They've been trying to figure that out for years. Was it like a genuine but just totally misguided love? Was it a cry for help that was masked? Is this completely inappropriate relationship? Maybe it was just a blatant disregard for the consequences?
It's really hard to say. Letourneau did give some explanations in those interviews over the years. She talked about feeling a connection with Fualaau, being drawn to his artistic side. But I don't know, those explanations always felt incomplete somehow.
Yeah, I get that. And that's the really tough thing about cases like this. We can look at all the facts, the legal stuff, how society reacted, but at the end of the day, we're left with this human puzzle, this really complex web of motivations and choices that we may never really understand.
Yeah, it really reminds you that people are complicated. Human behavior can be messy, contradictory, and sometimes it's driven by things that we don't even understand ourselves.
Exactly. And that's where I think empathy is so important. It's not about saying what she did was okay. It's about understanding that we're all capable of making mistakes, of letting emotions cloud our judgment.
I think that's a good point. It's acknowledging that human element, that these were flawed individuals who made choices that led to some really devastating consequences.
And those consequences are something we can't ignore. I mean, think about Lou Tourneau's 4 children from her previous marriage. They were thrown into the spotlight, forced to deal with all the shame and judgment that came with their mother's actions. And they lost their father, too.
Yeah.
He divorced Letourneau and moved to Alaska to get away from all the media attention.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And her 2 daughters with Fualaau, they grew up in the shadow of this incredibly controversial relationship, trying to figure out their own place in the world and trying to understand their family's unique and often painful story.
Right. It's a stark reminder that the effects of a case like this reach far beyond those 2 people at the center. It impacts families, communities, and even how society views these kinds of situations.
Absolutely. And when Letourneau died in 2020, it brought all this attention back to the case. And it seemed like Fualaau was really affected by it all. He even talked about struggling with depression and the complexities of their relationship.
It shows how powerful this story is, how it stays with people even years later. And it speaks to the challenges faced by those who are forever tied to a figure as controversial as Letourneau.
Yeah. It's interesting because Fulau's voice often gets lost in the retellings of this story.
Mm.
He's labeled a victim, a survivor, even a willing participant. But his perspective is so important if we really want to understand this whole thing.
Absolutely. He's really pushing back against the narrative that's been created around him. He's criticized the movie for exploiting their lives, for not capturing the real depth of their experiences.
It's a good reminder that even in these cases that seem so clear-cut, there are always multiple sides to the story, layers of complexity that we need to acknowledge and explore.
And that's what I love about these deep dives. They challenge us to confront those uncomfortable truths, to really wrestle with the ethical questions, and to see that human behavior isn't always black and white.
I agree. We've covered a lot of ground today. The legal battles, the media frenzy, the ethical questions, the lasting consequences of the choices that were made.
We have. But there's always more to uncover, more perspectives to think about.
This case, it will continue to be studied and debated for years to come. It's a powerful reminder of how important it is to protect children, to understand the power dynamics in these kinds of relationships, and to have open and honest conversations about consent and abuse.
I couldn't agree more. And beyond all that, we need empathy, not just for those directly involved, but for everyone who's been touched by this story, those who've struggled to understand it all.
Right. This deep dive has hopefully given you, our listener, a lot to think about. What stands out to you? What parts resonate most strongly? Remember, every story has multiple perspectives, and this one is no exception. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep having those conversations.
Absolutely. And most importantly, if you or someone you know is struggling with abuse or anything like that, please reach out for help. There are resources out there. You don't have to go through it alone.
Well said. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Mary Kay Letourneau and Vili Fualaau round story. We'll see you next time for another fascinating look into the world around us.